au-delà des limites. La session aujourd'hui est sur le rugby en fauteuil roulant et c'est appelé la première poussée.
We're going to just ask that you keep your mics muted. It's up to you whether or not you want your video on. You can enter your questions in the chat. We're going to try and do all of those at the end of the presentation, or you can just ask during the Q&A period at the end. So we're going to start with a slideshow, and then Nathan will get us into the athletes and coaches that we have on today. So I'm just going to start.
Donc, on vous demande de rester sur mute et utiliser la fonction chat. On va commencer la présentation et puis Nathan va continuer après avec l'entrevue.
So what is Bridging the Gap? This is a national outreach awareness first involvement program that's been designed to increase opportunities for participation in parasports for any individuals that have or do not have a physical disability. They're delivered by all of the provincial sport organizations across the country. And these PSOs today are together just bringing you this Bridging the Gap speaker series. So we have representation from Parasport PEI, Parasport Quebec, Wheelchair Sports Alberta, BC Wheelchair Basketball, Parasport New Brunswick, Ontario Para Network, Saskatchewan Wheelchair Sports, and the BC Wheelchair Sports.
Donc, le programme Au-delà des limites, c'est un programme de première participation, d'information et de sensibilité pour les personnes avec des déficiences ou des handicaps physiques. C'est aussi un programme qui est délivré à travers le Canada, donc toutes les organisations de Parasport au Canada.
Some of the program components to Bridging the Gap, they are a little different in each province, but everyone tries to stay similar with Have a Go days. These are just try it days where you can try different sports. We provide information and education sessions. We try hard to address barriers to participation. There's equipment loan programs, low to no cost programming. And it's important having athlete ambassadors as peer support for our new up and coming athletes. We have introductory developmental level programming and lots of partnerships with rehab centers and community organizations. And each province provides individualized support and follow-up.
Le programme Au-delà des limites est un peu différent dans chacune des provinces. Par contre, il y a des journées découvertes. Il y a aussi des sessions d'information pour les niveaux. C'est aussi un programme où on essaye d'éliminer les limites de plus en plus ou les obstacles, qui comprend aussi les prêts d'équipement, les prix réduits pour les programmes aussi, pour joindre les programmes, puis aussi le soutien de d'autres athlètes ambassadeurs à travers certains sports. Les programmes d'introduction sont très utilisés aussi pour les nouveaux. On a aussi des grands partenariats avec des centres de réhabilitation à travers le Canada. Et puis, on a aussi des supports individuels de chacune des provinces avec leurs propres athlètes aussi.
As part of the equipment loan program, new participants and current athletes can take advantage of this loan program in their province while they're trying out a new sport. These sport wheelchairs are designed for maximum speed and efficient turning. They provide support and balance throughout sport-specific movements and comfort for the athlete. So our first chair there is a rugby chair, followed by a wheelchair racer, and then a basketball sport chair.
Comme on a mentionné, le programme de prêt d'équipement, c'est un programme aussi pour donner la chance à des nouveaux d'essayer certains sports et d'emprunter les équipements utilisés pendant ces sports. Les chaises utilisées sont faites pour maximiser la vitesse et l'efficacité de mouvement durant chacun des sports. Puis aussi, c'est sécuritaire. Puis le confort de l'athlète est une priorité. Donc, on a une chaise, un fauteuil de rugby en fauteuil roulant, une chaise pour de l'athlétisme, et puis une chaise de basketball en fauteuil roulant.
And if you have any questions, there's support offered through all of the Bridging the Gap program coordinators. We're all listed here, and this will be recorded for you in future, or you can just contact any of their websites to get their information.
Donc, si vous avez des questions, vous pouvez nous joindre aux adresses courriel sur cette affiche. Et aussi, vous pouvez aussi nous contacter via notre site web.
Now, wheelchair rugby. This sport was created in Canada in Winnipeg around 1977, and it was originally called murder ball. It's a full contact sport. It uses wheelchairs that are specifically designed to give and receive hits. The sport was created for athletes with a physical impairment that affects at least 3 of their limbs. The game is played on a basketball court, and you use a ball that's almost identical to a volleyball. There's 4 players who need to carry or pass the ball until they score by crossing the opponent's goal line. But every 10 seconds, you need to do something with the ball, either dribble it or pass it. There's a classification system for this sport, and athletes are assigned a point value from 0.5 to 3.5, depending on your functional ability. A team is allowed up to 8 points on the court at any one time based on this classification.
Donc, le sujet du webinaire aujourd'hui, c'est le rugby en fauteuil roulant. Le rugby en fauteuil roulant a été inventé au Canada ici, à Winnipeg, en 1977. C'est un sport de contact avec des fauteuils qui sont adaptés à ce sport. Les athlètes qui sont utilisés pendant ce sport ou qui sont éligibles à jouer ce sport sont des athlètes ayant des handicaps physiques qui incluent au moins 3 membres du corps. Les règlements du jeu sont faits sur un terrain de basketball en fauteuil roulant. Le ballon est quand même assez identique à un ballon de volleyball. Ce jeu est joué 4 contre 4. Le but du jeu, c'est d'essayer de passer la ligne de but adverse en contrôlant le ballon. Et puis, tu as besoin de faire une passe ou de dribbler le ballon à chaque 10 secondes. La classification des athlètes dans ce sport sont déterminées par rapport à leur habileté physique. Et puis, les athlètes sont classés de classe 0.5 à 3.5. Et puis, chaque équipe de 4 joueurs peut seulement avoir un total de 10 points sur le terrain en même temps. Donc,
okay, and that's the end of our presentation for that. So I'm going to turn it over to Nathan, who's going to introduce our panelists today. Your mic is muted still.
Muted. Sorry, folks. My name is Nathan. I'm very fortunate to be moderating today's panel. We have 3 great athletes from across the country joining us, in addition to 1 coach to share their experiences and perspectives on rugby. I'm going to introduce them now, going from west to east. So first up, we have today's coach that's joining us, Kendra Todd. She's the assistant coach of the BC Provincial Wheelchair Rugby team, in addition to being the head coach of a club, the Okanagan Rattlers Wheelchair Rugby Club, and has been involved in the sport for several years now.
Donc, Kendra Todd vient de la Colombie-Britannique. Elle est l'assistante entraîneur de la Colombie-Britannique, ainsi que l'entraîneur en chef de son club régional. Et elle fait partie de ce sport depuis 7 ans.
And then Britt Mayer is one of the athletes joining us from Saskatchewan. He's a member of Wheelchair Rugby Canada's national team program and has won several Wheelchair Rugby national championships with Team Saskatchewan in D2. He's had a long career in the sport and very excited to have him join us today.
Donc, Britt Mayer vient de la Saskatchewan. Il fait partie nationale de Rugby Canada. Puis aussi, il a gagné plusieurs championnats nationaux avec sa province natale de la Saskatchewan.
Melanie Labelle is also joining us today. She's also a member of Wheelchair Rugby Canada's national team program, and she represented Canada at the Parapan Am Games in Lima in 2019. She's been a key wheelchair rugby player in Quebec and in Canada for a couple of years now, and we're very thankful to her for joining us.
Donc, Melanie Labelle fait partie aussi de l'équipe nationale de rugby en fauteuil roulant. Elle a notamment fait partie de l'équipe en 2019 à Lima au Pérou pour les Jeux parapanaméricains.
And then our final athlete is someone I've known for a very long time, Jeremy MacDonald, joining us from PEI. He's played rugby for several years now, often with the New Brunswick provincial team. He's had a long career in wheelchair basketball before making the fairly common switch over to wheelchair rugby. So he'll have some valuable insights on that.
Donc, Jeremy MacDonald vient de l'île François. Il a joué notamment avec l'équipe de New Brunswick. Il a aussi fait partie du sport du basketball en fauteuil roulant avant de faire une sautée du basketball en fauteuil roulant vers le rugby en fauteuil roulant.
So to get things started, we're going to start off with questions just for everybody on the panel. This first question is going to go from east to west. So we'll start with Jeremy, go to Mel, then Britt, and then finish with Kendra. And the first question is, how did you first get involved in wheelchair rugby? And what was that experience like? And we'll let Simon translate, and then Jeremy can jump in.
Comment as-tu découvert le rugby en fauteuil roulant et comment était ta première expérience?
So I got started actually, I think the first time it was mentioned to me might have been after I tried out for the junior national team for 09 Worlds for wheelchair basketball. I didn't quite make that team, but the coach on that team, Cheryl Corrigan, identified me as somebody who might be a good candidate to make the switch and potentially play both sports or make the permanent switch to rugby. So then I've decided to give it a try, and my first time actually in a rugby chair was, I think, early 2010. There was a Have a Go Day in Moncton, which is about an hour and a half from me here. And so I went over, and there was a bunch of guys from both New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And I think that practice was about 4 hours that day. And I remember barely being able to move for about 3 days after my first rugby practice. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done in the sport chair up to that point. It remains so. And then I really
Montreal Machines, so the local club, to the rehab center. And they had like lined up a few wheelchairs for us to try. We were 11 people trying. It was a big number at the time. And as soon as I got in the chair, it was a chair that was much easier for me to push than my day chair. And I just felt like invincible. I was like a superhero in that chair. And like I watch videos today and it looks painful because it's clumsy, but I felt invincible. So I lined up the biggest guy on court and just went to hit him. And that was it. Like I had to play wheelchair rugby from then on. And so that's my first introduction to it.
Donc, Mélanie, elle a commencé à jouer au rugby en fauteuil roulant. Elle a eu l'idée avec une de ses itinérants au centre de réhabilitation qui lui a suggéré de commencer à jouer au rugby en fauteuil roulant. Quand je l'ai embarqué sur le terrain, elle a trouvé que c'était beaucoup plus facile de pousser la chaise en fauteuil roulant pour le rugby que sa chaise de chaque jour. Puis elle a adoré cette expérience depuis ce jour. Elle a fait des gros contacts dans sa première session. Elle a adoré ça.
Right, and now we'll switch over to Britt out in Saskatchewan. Yeah, so Britt, just tell us a bit how you got into rugby, and yeah, what some of your first experiences were like.
So I first got into rugby chair when I was actually in rehab in Saskatoon City Hospital. The guy on the Saskatoon team came to visit me and then brought his chair up, thought he'd like to try it. So I tried it out there, and then I moved back to my parents' place on the farm for a couple of years, and then moved to Regina to my girlfriend at the time was going to university there, and I was helped start a rehab facility called First Steps Wellness Center. And then as soon as I got there, I tried to look up the team there so I could go play, because I used to play hockey at a pretty high caliber, and it would just kind of fit in. And actually, my first few games, though, I was fairly what do you want to say? This is not confusing, but just hard, because I was used to being good at hockey and stuff, and then the chair and everything was a lot harder and confusing and stuff. I don't know. It was not awesomely fun at first, but it got better real fast.
Nice.
Donc, Britt a eu un peu la même expérience que Mélanie en soyant introduit au sport à travers son centre de réhabilitation. Il a aussi eu un de ses plusieurs coéquipiers avec la Saskatchewan qui l'a introduit au sport au centre. Il a aussi été à la pratique avec lui après. Puis, au début, il a trouvé ça un peu difficile, mais il a commencé à aimer le sport de plus en plus à chaque pratique. Et puis, il adore ça maintenant.
All right. And now to Kendra. Now, as a coach and as somebody who doesn't have a disability, how did you discover wheelchair rugby, and what got you involved into the sport?
So, of course, I came at it from a little bit of a different perspective. I'm actually currently completing my PhD at the University of British Columbia, where I research exercise among people with a spinal cord injury. Through that experience, I met a few individuals in the community who have a spinal cord injury who were big wheelchair rugby players. And I also come from an able-bodied sporting background. And once they knew that I was kind of sport obsessed, they invited me to come out and play and see if I could handle my own on the court. Naturally, I could not, but I tried my best to keep up. And from there, I fell in love with the sport, and I did everything I could to become more involved and learn more and really learn the technical aspects. As Britt mentioned, that there's a lot to the sport. So I'm constantly learning, but I got involved through some fantastic players who showed me the ropes in the Okanagan.
Donc, Kendra a été introduit au rugby en fauteuil roulant à travers ses études postsecondaires. Elle a été invitée à une des sessions d'introduction au sport. Et elle a adoré le sport dès le début. Et elle a voulu s'impliquer de plus en plus. Donc, elle a allé dans la route du coaching.
Okay, Great. Well, that was a good first question. And this next one actually follows up a little bit on some of the things mentioned in that first one. And this next one is, what, if any, barriers did you face to get involved in wheelchair rugby? And what help did you receive to get through those? And also, I think a good extension on that is a couple of you mentioned how the sport was really hard at the start. So what was it that made you decide to keep coming back and break that barrier down of it being hard when you started? And we'll go west to east on this. So we'll start with Kendra, and I know it'll be a little bit different for a coach. But what sort of challenges did you face when you were starting out in the sport?
Donc, la deuxième question, ça sera quels sont les obstacles que tu as parcouru à travers et quelles étaient les aides que tu as reçues pour passer à travers ces obstacles?
I would say that my largest barrier getting involved in coaching the sport was starting to try to teach athletes when I didn't feel that I was an expert myself yet, nor do I yet feel that I'm an expert. I'd say that it became sort of confidence limiting, where I didn't feel like I knew every single technical component when I wanted all of our athletes and our team to succeed to the level that I thought possible. But to overcome those barriers, it was a lot of listening. We're surrounded by some amazing, amazing technical athletes and players that love sharing their knowledge of the sport. And I took a lot of time to listen, and I've watched hours and hours of game tape. I've probably burnt through the tapes if they were hard copy. So it's just been consistent learning and talking to people to make sure that I'm confident enough to share the skills to go along with leadership skills that I've developed over the years.
Donc, pour Kendra, au début, c'était plus de l'aspect technique et tactique qu'elle n'avait pas confiance. Et elle a appris beaucoup de ces athlètes qui ont beaucoup d'expérience dans le sport. Donc, elle a appris beaucoup de petits trucs. Et puis, elle a gagné beaucoup de confiance depuis.
So now we'll go to Britt. Yeah, Britt, so what were some of the barriers and the challenges you faced when you were first getting started? I know you mentioned that it was really difficult those first couple games.
Yeah, like, wow, physically, mentally, everything was new, and just kind of got figured out how to live my life again after injury, and then tried to figure out a new sport. And it was fun and very I don't know, I got mad at myself a lot at first because it wasn't coming as fast as I would want it to at first. And then kind of hard-headed, so I kind of clashed with some of the team members a little bit over some things. And it wasn't everybody gets over it after the game though, no big deal.
And I guess you mentioned like clashing with some of your teammates a bit, but how did they help you as well with figuring out some of those things and learning now that you can look back on it a bit removed from the frustrating times?
Well, actually, everybody is actually really helpful. Even if you do get have the clashes, like I said, everybody wants to help everybody out as much as you can. It's actually the most supportive sport I've been in by far, by any teammate, no matter what kind of personal relationship you have with them. Everybody's very helpful, and everybody wants to win. It's very competitive. So when it's only 4 players on the court at a time, everybody kind of needs to work as a group.
Nice.
Donc, Britt, au début, c'était plus son horaire, puis c'est quotidienne qui avait plus de misère en hors des sports. Puis quand tu es devenu, quand tu as commencé son parcours à travers le rugby en fauteuil roulant, il pensait que ça allait venir très facilement, mais ça n'a pas venu aussi facile qu'il pensait. De ce côté, ses coéquipiers ont été très, très bons pour l'encourager, pour essayer de le garder dans le sport. Comme il a dit, la communauté du rugby en fauteuil roulant est la meilleure communauté qu'il a jamais été à travers. Donc, c'est ça.
So yeah, Mel, now we'll pass the mic, the metaphorical mic over to you.
Well, a bit like Britt, I mean, you have to relearn everything post-injury. We're not good quads. Like we really, we know nothing about ourselves. We just have to relearn everything. So the first barrier I was confronted to was basically equipment. I was tiny. I was a lady coming to mostly male sport. The chairs were too big for me. Even though they were easier than my day chair to push, just because of the position that you were inside, they were still too big for me to be able to perform with. That was broken down with like me doing a fundraiser with my community, but also having access to a CAF grant that paid basically half of the chair price. Chairs are very expensive, so I was really lucky early on to get a new chair kind of fitted for my body. Of course, it's never perfect because we kind of morph into our new quad body after that, but at least I had something to work with basically when I started. And I felt very lucky because I saw more newcomers coming into the sport and not having that kind of financial support and be like having to work with what's there on court. And you know, it's fun to have something that works, and the equipment is hard to maintain. So I'm seeing it as a barrier for newcomers in the sport, even though we try to have like equipment easily accessible for those coming now in the sport. It's still something that's hard for them to have. And then it was help too. Like I had to ask my boyfriend, hey, Mike, I'd really like to play wheelchair rugby, but I really can't do it alone. And, you know, I could go to the club practices, but the helpers there are there to help their people. Like I cannot put my load onto their shoulders. Like I need to bring my own helper too. So if you want to come with me, I'd be really happy to go, but I can't do it. I can't do it alone. And I was also lucky to have someone to come to like 2 practices per week, tournaments. And like, he jumped in and we created like a whole adventure together. For him, what was fun is that he could talk to other people, like other helpers living with people with the same disability as me. And for me, I was able to like ask a lot of questions. I felt very normal. Like we all had quad bellies. We all like really had issues with, you know, bowel bladder and stuff. I could ask everybody what their tricks were and find my own pace as I'm like got better in the sport. And when I was first introduced to the prospect camp, and I really had to go away for a week to the prospect camp with Team Canada, I told Adam Frost, the coach at the time, I'm like, this camp really playing for me is a break, because this camp is teaching me how to live in a hotel in an unadapted environment. It's just going to teach me how to like live, basically. I don't know how to do all of these things. So that's what's going to be hard for me this week. It's not the playing part. It's really the living part. So that's kind of the barriers that you have to break at first, and then it becomes normal.
Donc, la première barrière que Melanie a passé à travers, c'était la barrière d'équipement. Donc, quand tu l'as arrivé au sport, sa chaise était trop grande. Donc elle a vraiment été chanceuse du côté d'amasser des fonds, et puis amasser des fonds de sa propre communauté, ainsi qu'avoir des fonds à travers certaines bourses qui ont été disponibles. De l'autre côté aussi, elle a aussi demandé à son partenaire de participer aussi pendant les sessions de rugby. Donc, elle suggère aussi d'amener un ami ou un membre de la famille pour faire partie de l'expérience, puis pour faire l'environnement un peu plus plaisant pour tout le monde.
All right, and last, but certainly not least, Jeremy, what barriers did you face, you know, when first getting involved in the sport, or what did you find most challenging when getting involved in rugby, and what, if anything, helped you with that, or were there any individuals or organizations that helped you break those down?
Yeah, so here in the East, it's kind of an interesting situation because where I'm from and where I am now, PEI really has no history of wheelchair rugby ever. I don't think we've ever had a team here. And so I've had to go a little bit afield to find a place to play a lot of the time. I actually did my first couple degrees in Halifax. So I moved to Nova Scotia, but when I moved there, although they had produced some high-level players in the past, in the early 2000s, that were actually in the national program, by the time that I got there, those guys kind of had given up their interest in playing at a high level. And so there wasn't really any infrastructure in Nova Scotia when I was there, and no real interest in being competitive. So for me to find that, I often had to travel to New Brunswick for places to practice and play. And not having a car, I often went long bus rides just to practice, and crashing at guys' houses so I couldn't practice. So that was one area of support I had, was teammates opening their homes to me. Things like that, so I could practice and play. I would echo Melanie's sentiments when it comes to equipment. As a CP in rugby, we're very finicky when it comes to what we need and what works equipment-wise. And I honestly can say that in all my time in the game, I've never played in a chair that was well suited to my body. So I have no idea what that even feels like. So geography, infrastructure, resources, in addition to the learning curve on the court that everyone's spoken about, were some of the challenges that I faced. And honestly, as Britt said, teammates in rugby, they always have your back and they're incredibly supportive, whether that be tips on court or how to travel and be on the road, or just giving you a place to crash or ride, whatever it might be, they're there for you. But it's certainly a unique perspective in the East, for sure.
Donc, pour Jeremy, lui, le défi était d'avoir des coéquipiers qui étaient près de chez lui. Donc, il devait voyager pour pratiquer avec ses coéquipiers. Il a dû voyager en Nouvelle-Écosse et au Nouveau-Brunswick pour accéder aux pratiques de rugby en fauteuil roulant. Donc, le support de ses coéquipiers pour l'inviter à rester chez eux pendant ses camps ou ses pratiques est un grand support. Et encore une fois, il conclut que la communauté de rugby est très, très accueillante de ce côté, une des meilleures communautés qu'il y a.
So a lot of people on that last question mentioned equipment as a major barrier, and that's where a lot of the BTG program can come in and provide some assistance, especially in those early stages, through the equipment loan program and just through their resources and helping athletes find additional support or providing direct support for some equipment down the line. So yeah, definitely. There's always a way to start and get involved. The equipment might not be perfect when you first start out, but everybody on this call and all the organizations are very invested in helping people find something that works for them. I just wanted to make sure that was out there. Going on to our next question, and it's, what advice would you give to someone who's thinking of getting involved in the sport for the first time? Because you have all mentioned how positive it's been and how supportive of a community it is, but you've also mentioned some really real challenges. So what advice would you have for someone who's thinking about starting out but might be a little on the fence? And yeah, I'll let Simon translate, and then we'll start with Britt this time.
Donc, quel serait votre message pour les nouveaux participants dans le rugby en fauteuil roulant?
Good to go?
Yep.
Well, I would say if you get frustrated, don't quit right away. Keep going back, because frustration is going to happen for sure for a little while, and it's well worth doing by far. And the gain is so much more than you'll ever know. Like, it'll help you with all parts of your life, not just your sports or anything like that, but it helps you learn how to live by yourself, or like travel or any of that stuff, because that's all we do is go to hotels and travel. That's how we play the sport.
Donc, Britt, mentionne que même si tu viens frustré au début, n'abandonne pas. Aussi, le sport te fait vivre et apprendre beaucoup à travers ta vie même, en voyageant et même en restant avec tes coéquipiers.
All right, and we'll go to Jeremy next.
So I would echo Britt in saying, try to fight through any initial frustrations or those challenges that you face early on and just kind of keep going. And I would say, talk to as many people as you can and ask as many questions as you can, and not just your own teammates. Like if you're at a tournament, like don't be afraid to go up to people that you might have heard of but might not know and be like, hey, how do you do this? Or what do you do for this? Or, where'd you get those gloves or whatever it might be? Because by and large, people are very open to sharing information and tips, as has been mentioned before. So that's what I say. Just sort of trying to build as many connections in the game and in the community as you can, because it's a really welcoming community, and that's a huge step to sort of making gains when you're first kind of starting out.
Donc, Jeremy mentionne n'abandonne pas malgré les obstacles que tu vas passer à travers. Essaye aussi d'avoir des relations entre tes coéquipiers en posant des questions, essaye de t'impliquer dans le groupe. C'est aussi une communauté qui va vraiment t'accueillir à bras ouverts. Donc, implique-toi vraiment dans le groupe et tu feras partie de la famille.
And Mel, we'll go to you next, and then we'll finish with Kendra for the coach's perspective, just to keep a flow with athletes and then coaches.
I'd definitely say put your student hat on, be open-minded to receive any tips from anyone, or even to ask questions and learn. Also, don't be afraid to communicate or tell what you're anxious about or what you may need, what your needs are. I cannot speak for other conditions or disabilities, but for quads, it was a very anxious moment for me to not have help or to not being able to communicate what I needed and when. But the community was there to help me. Everybody's got kits if you're in trouble. So we learn from each other, and we pass on information. So basically, it's don't be scared to come and try. Don't be scared to come and play, and we'll figure it out together. Whatever the gates that you meet, whatever the issues you have, we'll figure it out together. We're a team, and that's not necessarily like it's on and off the court. So basically, yeah, just come and play.
Donc, Mélanie mentionne pose des questions, essaye de communiquer avec tes coéquipiers, tes entraîneurs, pour les mentionner quels sont tes besoins, et puis essaie de s'inclure dans le groupe. C'est vraiment une équipe, et puis viens-t'en l'essayer, et tu vas faire partie de la famille.
And now we'll go to Kendra last for this one, just to talk about advice for coaches, but not only advice for coaches, but also for volunteers or anybody who's maybe not necessarily, who wouldn't necessarily consider themselves as part of the community, who then would become a part of it. And I think you've done a really good job with your club of recruiting a lot of volunteers in that manner. So what advice would you have for people coming from outside of the world who are looking to get involved in rugby, whether it's through providing equipment support, coaching, or just being a general volunteer?
To be honest, a lot of it isn't that different than some of the sentiments that have been expressed already. And I'll echo a lot of the things that Melanie said as well. A lot of it is, of course, you come from a place of respect to begin with, and you always want to ask questions. And if you're not involved in Parasport previously, there's going to be a lot of questions. How do I help you? How do I help you transfer? This person needs to be transferred this way, but I see you got into your rugby chair some way different. How can I help? And I think if you come from a perspective of saying, how can I help? Then you're automatically going to learn a lot quicker than just jumping in and maybe doing things that people don't necessarily feel is respectful to them and their needs. But also you're going to learn a lot quicker by just becoming more comfortable and learning how everyone does everything a little bit differently. I have been fortunate to work with a lot of volunteers through my role at the university, but that is also through just spreading awareness of parasport. And before every class, I was showing video clips of wheelchair rugby. And then the question is, okay, what is that? How do I get involved? And as soon as you share excitement, and as soon as more and more people become aware of a sport, they realize sort of what more is out there. But although I would say that I'm not necessarily directly a part of the family through the nature of not having a disability, the rugby family has very wide arms. And I think that once you're in that circle, it's a very special place to be. And that's why so many people are involved for so many years, because it's an expansive family. As soon as you're involved and you're helping and you're learning and you're sharing, whether as a coach, a volunteer, an athlete, an events manager, everything, it's a very unique place to be, by everyone sharing mutual and distinct experiences. But I think it all comes down to very, very understood and mutual respect right from the get-go.
Cool. And we're going to let Simon translate that. That's a pretty big answer, so we'll give him some time.
Donc, Kendra mentionne qu'elle écho encore les commentaires des autres. Elle encourage les bénévoles à venir faire du bénévolat, à s'impliquer comme entraîneur, à poser des questions aux athlètes, comment puis-je t'aider, et vraiment s'impliquer. La communauté rugby, encore une fois, a été mentionnée comme l'une des meilleures communautés qu'il y a. Donc, venez comme bénévole, venez comme entraîneur, impliquez-vous.
Okay, and our last question, which we've touched upon a little bit in some of these other answers already, is just what impact has wheelchair rugby, or really sport in general, had on your life since you got involved?
Donc, quel est l'impact du sport des rugby en fauteuil roulant à ta vie jusqu'à présent?
And we'll start with Jeremy this time, so everybody gets a chance to kick things off. Or, sorry, we'll start with Mel. Mel hasn't started yet. My apologies.
I can't communicate how much of an impact it's had. When I was in rehab, the prognostic wasn't very good. And when you've not been around disability before, it's hard to imagine what's the world going to be like for you. It's hard for you to communicate it with your family, and it's hard for everyone to start learning when everyone's kind of grieving the change. So rugby helped through that transition, of course. For me, being able to tell my parents, my family, hey, I'm around like some people that are amazing. Look at what they can do. I'm sure I can do half or maybe 100% of what they are doing. And surely enough, like the objectives that I had set myself were too low. The bar was way too low. I was told many times by Pat Cote, the national team coach, that I need to review my objectives because I was going to smash all of them within like 6 months. And he was right. So I set myself to be hopefully fully independent, and I was aiming for that. And I'm so glad that I did, because I've given myself a lot more freedom that I thought that I could have when I first got injured. So that for me is like the greatest gift I could have given myself. And I will be an advocate for wherever I speak, whenever I speak, for people to seek for a better quality of life and more than what they think they can have through sport.
Donc, vraiment, le rugby en fauteuil roulant a changé la vie de Mélanie. Lorsqu'elle était au centre de réhabilitation, elle ne savait pas qu'est-ce que la vie elle apportait après ces jours. Donc, quand elle a commencé à être impliquée dans le rugby, ça a vraiment ouvert les portes pour elle. Ça l'a fait réaliser, ça l'a fait vraiment, le sport a vraiment donné un sentiment d'appartenance à un groupe. Et ça l'a aussi donné le sentiment d'indépendance aussi dans sa vie de tous les jours. Donc, c'est vraiment une expérience qui a changé sa vie.
And we'll go to Britt next.
So I'll have to say, like, I'll have to agree with Mel on all her comments. It really pushed me to become self-sufficient, and like I live alone now. And when I first started, I had a roommate, or I had a girlfriend at the time, but now I live alone and I travel alone and do everything I ever really wanted to do. And I never really thought I'd probably be able to do that before. But like Mel said, you just push yourself a little further and further every time, and it really helps out. I'm a little, also I'm off track now, but we'll just ask the question again there, Nate. What was it again?
Yeah, what impact has rugby had in your life? And you've touched upon it already there, but
yeah. Oh, also I was gonna say just the amount of people I've met and the places I've been, like traveled to many different countries now and met people from all over the place, and just expands your whole life. It's very any kind of sport that you get to do that kind of thing with, it's, I don't know, I think it's very special.
Donc, Britt a mentionné, comme Melanie avait mentionné aussi, que ça lui a donné un sentiment d'indépendance dans sa vie tous les jours. Ça lui a fait apprendre qu'il pouvait se pousser de plus en plus à chaque jour. Ça lui a aussi donné l'opportunité de voyager, de rencontrer des nouvelles personnes et des nouveaux amis.
All right. And we'll go to Kendra, and then we'll wrap up with Jeremy.
The greatest impact. That's actually a tough one from a coach perspective, because I don't know, there's been so many. I think what I would say is that I've learned the importance of resilience so much through my role as a coach, whether it be my own introduction into a new sport as a coach, where I've never personally played the sport at any level except for playing for fun, just whenever we don't have enough players. But also watching new players come into the sport, and as everything's already been expressed, really blossom into their own individual and gain such a sense of independence, both through the sport and in life. And I think that it shows a testament of strength, and it's something that can't be compared to anything else. And it's amazing to be around, amazing to watch. And although I feel like I have no role in it necessarily as a coach, it's really, really unique to be around. It's something unique to sport, and also specifically disability sport and wheelchair rugby. But the impacts they extend far past sport for me. It's a family where I don't live close to my blood family. So I'm fortunate to have so many people around me that I care so much about.
Donc, Kendra a mentionné qu'à travers son expérience comme entraîneur, ça lui a vraiment montré qu'est-ce que la définition de la résilience d'une personne. Vraiment de passer à travers des obstacles que quelqu'un passe à travers leur vie même avant de rentrer dans le sport, et puis de les voir performer à niveau. Puis vraiment de performer dans un haut niveau d'un sport, et vraiment de se remettre sur leurs pieds dans leur vie de tous les jours. C'est vraiment, ça demande vraiment de la force. Et puis c'est vraiment la définition de la résilience.
And yeah, Jeremy, we'll finish this question up with you.
Well, it's really hard for me to encapsulate the impact that rugby and sport in general has had in my life. My experience is a little bit different than some of the others in that I was born with a disability, and I didn't acquire one. And so from the time I was a kid, I was born into a very sports-minded family, but there wasn't always a clear path for me as a kid as to how I would ever participate in sport. There wasn't a lot of organized sport here in the island when I was a kid. So first came basketball for me, and then rugby, and the impact of it, I can't overstate. Like, it's taught me the greatest lessons in my life. Like, as an only child, it's taught me how to work in a group, how to sacrifice and put the goals of the collective ahead of your own individual goals. It's taught me humility, work ethic, accountability, it's incredible the impact the sport and rugby has had. And so it's given me some of my best friends in life. And so I owe a ton to this sport and the other sports I've been involved in. And my life would be much less fulfilling, I think, had I not been an athlete.
Donc vraiment, ça, pour Jérémy, il a été né avec une déficience ou un handicap physique depuis la naissance. Donc vraiment, le basketball en fauteuil roulant et le rugby en fauteuil roulant il a vraiment ouvert une porte pour les sports et être actif dans sa communauté. Ça lui a appris aussi d'être un bon coéquipier et ça l'a aussi appris plusieurs autres leçons dans sa vie. Donc, ça a vraiment changé sa vie de ce côté.
Now, I have a few other questions, but I know that we're running fairly low on time. So I wanted to open it up to a Q&A in case anybody who's watching has a question either for the group or an individual panelist. If there are no questions, I'll ask one or two more questions and then we'll wrap this up. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions come through. So my next question is an individual question. And this one is actually going to be for Jeremy, because you came to rugby with a background in other parasports. What was that transition like? And what skills did you already have? And what skills did you have to learn when you moved into rugby?
Yes.
Jeremy, comment était ta transition du basketball en fauteuil roulant au rugby en fauteuil roulant?
So as I stated before, yeah, I came from the basketball world before I started rugby, and luckily we were talking about before the call how many of the skills between the two sports translate, and many of the same skills are needed when it comes to air skills, passing, catching, things like that. So I had those basic kinds of skills already there, I think. The big adjustments, I think, for me were the equipment, because a rugby chair is a different piece of equipment than a ball chair. It's heavier, and I was sitting in a chair with a dump for the first time in my life. I had never sat in one like that before, so that was an adjustment as well, trying to just maneuver it and get around. But I think it was interesting because I was able to develop good relationships with my low pointers initially, because I kind of knew how to think like a low pointer from ball. So that was another advantage I had. So it was a lot to still learn, but I think I had a good base coming into the sport, which I was lucky for.
Donc, Jeremy a mentionné que pour lui, il y avait quelques ajustements à faire, notamment la chaise et différents du basketball en fauteuil roulant en fauteuil roulant. Donc, ça, c'est un ajustement qu'il y a dû s'habituer. Les habiletés utilisées au basketball en fauteuil roulant et au rugby au fauteuil roulant sont quand même assez similaires. Donc, de cet aspect, c'était quand même assez bien pour lui, la transition.
Cool. And my next question is for Britt and Mel. So either of you or both of you can feel free to jump in on this one. But you're both lower point athletes, so you have a bit less function than, say, some of the higher point players in the sport. And I think for somebody watching or anybody who's coming to the sport at a similar level, can you just talk about some of the adaptations you've made in terms of learning how to maybe pass or catch that could be helpful to them if they've never really thought that it's something that they might be able to do, and just some of the ways you've been able to succeed and adapt around those functional limitations?
Donc, Britt et Melanie, quelles seraient les adaptations, le message que vous auriez pour certaines habiletés pour des athlètes ayant qui seraient classés à un niveau plus bas.
Where do you want to go, or should I start? Or
You can start, Mel.
okay, well, unlike Jeremy, like my accident happened when I was 30 years old. So of course, I had played sport as an able body and full functionality of my muscles and stuff. So my brain was wired a certain way. Of course, when I first sat down in a chair and tried to throw a ball, my brain was wired so that I would use the muscles that I'm used to. So that was quite a shock. So that's why you kind of have to be open-minded. And I had a discussion that became like the light bulb for me. It was with Pat, and it wasn't even about like functionality and stuff. He was just talking to me about his son and how he was like, his little kid was trying to start walking. And he was like, it's so crazy how he will fail 1,000 times, but he is so confident that he will get up and walk. It's really cool to watch. And right then and there, I was like, of course, I've done this before. I grew up and I learned all the skills, like being sure that I was going to achieve it. So why can't I do it again? So I just had to like shut the brain down and try to recreate all of those reflexes with my new set of cards. So whatever I had function left, I was just going to shut the brain down and go with what I had. And when that mindset switched, that's when I was the most successful, actually. Throwing the ball wasn't going to be like it was before. It was going to be however it was going to happen. And it looks however it looks, but it works. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Donc, Mélanie a mentionné, après sa blessure, c'était un peu difficile à apprendre comment lancer, par exemple. Et puis, elle a mentionné aussi que malgré tous les essais qu'elle a fait, c'est la persévérance qui l'a vraiment poussé à travers cet obstacle. Donc, tu continues continuer d'essayer certaines habiletés, tu vas passer à travers et puis tu vas compléter l'habileté de la meilleure façon que tu peux.
So, like earlier in the conversation, I was talking about frustrations that I was having, or you'll have when you start. And a lot of it is just learning the skills, like throwing, picking up a ball, wheeling your chair, all these things. And to elaborate on Mel's thing a little bit about just however it's going to happen, it'll happen. It's because all of us are so different in our injuries when we were injured, like lower quads, that none of us actually really do everything the same. So it's just a lot of trial and error and figuring out which part of your body works a little bit better than what somebody else's does, or which part actually works and which doesn't. That's all.
Donc, Britt a mentionné, comme Mélanie avait dit dans son commentaire aussi, c'est un peu essai-erreur. À chaque fois, tu vas essayer une habileté. Et puis, le plus tu pratiques, le mieux ça va venir. Et tu vas réapprendre les mouvements que tu as besoin d'apprendre pour devenir meilleur au sport.
Awesome. And I'll just add a point overall on this and about rugby in general. Like we said, it's for athletes with impairment in 3 or more limbs, and that can include a variety of different disabilities of impairment, including spinal cord injuries and cerebral palsy, which we've heard from on this call, but also certain amputees, certain neuromuscular disorders like Charcot-Marie tooth, or some forms of muscular dystrophy or spinal muscular atrophy can fit quite well into wheelchair rugby. And just to echo Britt's point, even though everybody might have different ways of doing things or different functions within that, it is quite a helpful community as far as people being willing to provide different tips and tricks or suggestions on how to achieve the goals or the skills that they set out, whether it's on the rugby court or off of it in life in general.
Donc, Nathan a mentionné aussi que le sport du rugby en fauteuil roulant, c'est un sport qui est éligible pour des athlètes ayant un handicap à 3 membres. Donc, ça comprend une variété d'handicaps. Et puis, on encourage tout le monde à joindre. C'est une communauté qui est très ouverte et on est ouvert à aider et à accueillir tout le monde. Donc, c'est ça.
All right, so that wraps up everything for today's presentation. Thank you so much to everybody who joined in. For anybody who's watching this now or anyone who's going to watch it later, if any questions come up about wheelchair rugby or you want to learn more information about how to get involved in the sport, please reach out to your province's respective BTG coordinator. We'll all be more than happy to help you get started on your wheelchair rugby journey. So you can all take that first push and hopefully score that first try. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much to all 4 of our panelists for sharing their experiences, their stories, and their tips and tricks with all of us.
Donc, merci à tous de nous avoir rejoints aujourd'hui. Merci à nos 4 invités. Merci à vous aussi qui nous avez rejoints à travers Zoom. On vous invite aussi à nous contacter dans chacune de vos provinces respectives. Et puis, on espère que vous allez nous joindre bientôt sur le terrain.